Hey everybody, it's Writerpunk. In this video, I'm going to talk about why I write dark fantasy as opposed to any other genre. When I first decided to make this video, I planned to discuss why I write dark fantasy and what I believe makes good dark fantasy. While writing my script, I realized I was having trouble with it because those are two different, albeit adjacent topics, so consider this video part 1. I'll likely make a follow-up sometime in the future, but I'm not sure if that will be this month since I have a couple other videos already planned. I would also like to caution that these are my biggest reasons, not all of them, and I've also condensed them a bit to avoid turning this into an hour-long monologue. So, without further ado, onward. So the first reason that I write dark fantasy is because this genre allows me to explore situations and characters from angles that allow for more gray area than other types of fantasy. Most simply, generally good characters can do bad things, and generally evil characters can do good things. To take that even further, there might not necessarily be any essentially good or evil characters, and I like that because it doesn't box me into any strict character morality archetypes like the cleric or the assassin. For example, dark fantasy allows me to have a cleric who maybe actively and openly questions their faith and/or who bends the rules a bit in order to accomplish some goal. Without spoiling any of my future works too much, a way I apply this reason to one of my projects is with a character I'll call Gemma, which is not what she's called in the story. She is in a leadership position, and a lot of people are depending on her to figure out something that, if she fails at figuring it out, will result in a lot of people's deaths. Due to the circumstances of the story, it will mostly be her fault if that happens. Before getting involved in her plotline, she made a Herculean effort to be a force of good in a place where goodness was hard to come by, and she made a name for herself as a sort of the guardian angel of her community. Now that the plot happened, Gemma has to take her efforts to the extreme to help those affected and to keep the people that she loves alive, going so far as to commit murder, not just once but frequently, lie and cheat in order to protect her found family from a problem that is far outside any of their control. And just because she helps others doesn't make her a saint in words or manners. She's actually kind of abrasive and is easily exasperated if she feels her patience is being tested. She's prone to aggressive outbursts, yells a lot, and came from a pretty rough background. By no means is she a grizzled but with a heart of gold type, but no one could ever say that she doesn't have some goodness within her. Reason 2 is that dark fantasy removes the need to censor certain aspects of a story that can enhance the plot, characters, or setting that you'd otherwise have to remove in stories that are less prone to darkness. These aspects could include graphic violence, physical intimacy, horror devices, or really anything that would warrant a parental advisory sticker or an 18+ movie designation. Portraying the events of a book without holding back can really serve to drive home the consequences of characters' actions and the truth of what they've inflicted on others. It isn't really within the scope of this video to talk about how far is too far or what constitutes realism versus gratuity, and I do believe there is a line, so I won't comment on that much right now. But there is something to be said for depicting violence and intimacy in a way that doesn't prettify the reality of either of them, but at the same time avoids romanticizing or glorifying them, especially when the usual method of dealing with these subjects is to clean them up, either to make them more palatable or to get around some sort of outside censor. On the less extreme side, not needing to censor things like profanity, substance use, or abuse, and exploring complicated or controversial topics opens an abundance of doors in every aspect of story: characterization, setting, backstory, plot conflicts, and setups. I do believe all these topics can be discussed in a way that has artistic merit. I do not think that pretty much anything should be avoided in storytelling just for the sake of decency. An example of a complex topic I've written about in the past is fertility issues, which is something that probably wouldn't come up, or at least not in the same way, in a story that has a lighter tone. If infertility, miscarriage, or stillbirth are sensitive topics for you, you may want to skip ahead. In this application, a supporting character is in a deep struggle with herself over the fact that she is unable to have children, which is her most pressing goal in life. Motherhood is something she has always wanted for herself, and on the interpersonal side is something that her social status nigh on requires. Grappling with her personal and social need to raise children leads to an affair, a destroyed friendship, and a suicide, all of which impact the greater story. As far as intimacy goes, a project of mine contains 2 intimate scenes. In the first scene, the main character, who we'll call Jordan, also not her name, has slept with one man, Peter, who respects her as an equal. In the second scene, she sleeps with Mark, who does not. The purpose of these scenes is threefold. 1, to illustrate Jordan's growth as a character and strengthen the worth and esteem in which she holds herself, although this is explored more in the aftermath. 2, to highlight the difference in treatment of women and female sexuality between two cultures. And 3, as a conflict device to spur on the next stages of the story, although there are no love triangles here. Getting this close to a character in one of their most vulnerable states is extremely effective for characterizing not only them, but the setting and society in which they live. And without these two scenes, Jordan specifically would not come to terms with what she needs to do in order to seize her agency for good. The dark part comes in with the surrounding circumstances of the plot, which would give away which story it is, and, spoilers. Reason 3 kind of ties into the last two reasons, and the third reason is that dark fantasy forces me to think about limiting factors that might not have as immediate or long-lasting consequences in other genres of fantasy. Death, disease, serious or disabling injury, psychological issues, and similar. All of these things lend themselves well to minor conflicts and character depth and can even seriously affect where a plot ends up. One of my characters, Ruth, is one of only 2 main characters to survive her book. Her sisters both perished during the events of the novel, leaving her in charge of something nobody had ever planned for her to need to govern, nor do some think that she should have ended up governing, given her personal circumstances. What does this lead to? War, and an immense one, a period of conflict that lasts almost 300 years long after the original instigators have run out their natural life, and the conflict is not pretty. In fact, it fractures a once stable empire completely beyond repair. During Ruth's lifetime, she grows from a good-natured, faithful girl into a woman grieving for the loss of her sisters, her culture, and her nation. She begins to believe the lie that mortals are inherently motivated by selfishness and greed, and it contributes to her downfall. It is possible to have shown this transformation without also showing the violence behind it and the trauma it caused, but I don't think it would have left the same impression. A smaller application of limiting factors comes with yet another story in which a supporting character, Victoria, loses her livelihood due to an attack that left her unable to perform. Though it happened many years ago by the time her character is introduced, this loss of agency and ability makes her a very angry and bitter person. However, she does secretly adopt others whose circumstances have similarly made them unable to succeed as one normally would, and gives them work, a bed, and companionship, something which was stolen from her at a very young age, and because she feels obligated to apologize for something that the main character discovers about her family. Victoria also takes a young woman who shares similar skills to hers under her direct mentorship in the hopes that her life won't turn out the same. My fourth reason, and my second to last, is that dark fantasy has inherent stakes. Anything can happen, good or bad, and things can always get worse. All the things mentioned in Reason 3 and more can happen through the course of the story, and the only true guiding light the characters have that anything they go through can be overcome is hope. I'll talk more about the very important position of hope in dark fantasy in this video's part 2. The best example of how I apply this reason is contained in my novels Silverblood and Marrow, but explaining how things go from bad to worse to absolutely abysmal would ruin both with spoilers, so it looks like we'll have to move on to the next reason. Reason 5 may be my most controversial, potentially, but is one that I really can't make a video about this without talking about. One of the reasons I write dark fantasy is to challenge the idea that women only write, or are only good at writing, young adult romance or urban fantasy, and that female leads aren't a good choice for serious stories. I have had the following conversation with too many people almost verbatim to not have noticed a trend. So, what do? I'm a writer. Oh, I also blog. Oh no, I mean I write fantasy novels. Oh, okay, so like Twilight? I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, so I try to assume that most of them just aren't familiar with fantasy beyond popular works like Twilight. Although, there are also other, I would consider more famous works than Twilight, like Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones and The Witcher, but that's for another video. However, when I get follow-up responses like, girls can't write fantasy, female leads are boring, oh, so you're like Cassandra Clare or Sarah J. Maas or Stephanie Meyer or Suzanne Collins, oh, you should use a male pen name or no one will buy your book. Women are better at romance and YA, so you should write that instead. No one will take you seriously. Female leads can't sword fight, wear real armor, swear, bleed, be strong and emotional, must have a male character to fall back on, and have to be womanly. So what, like Harry Potter fanfiction, or dark fantasy, isn't that a little aggressive for girls? Hearing all that, it's just not something that I can blithely take at face value anymore without further context. So, by writing dark fantasy, I hope to prove, if to no one other than myself, that women can write good books that aren't centered on heterosexual romance, urban fantasy, or young adult target audiences. Female leads can carry a novel without a male love interest or other male leads to fall back on, and that I don't need to use a clearly masculine pen name in order to sell books. I mean, for Pete's sake, a woman invented the damn genre. Her name was Gertrude Barrows Bennett, and she published under the name Frances Stevens between 1917 and 1923. She has been cited as the woman who invented dark fantasy and the mother of dark fantasy, famously penning the novels The Citadel of Fear in 1918 and Claimed in 1920. Not only that, but it's contended that she was the first female speculative fiction author in the United States to publish under her real name, as her first short story was published when she was 17. Yeah, 17. Under the name G.M. Barrows. Even more weighty is that, according to Eric Leaf Davin, author of Partners in Wonder, Women and the Birth of Science Fiction, her style and themes influenced the likes of H.P. Lovecraft, one of the most influential speculative fiction writers ever. So, in conclusion, women absolutely can and do and should write darker flavors of fantasy. So, rant over. Now that that's all out, these are the top 5 reasons why I write dark fantasy. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I appreciate all likes, comments, and subscriptions if you enjoy my content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.